anything. We're going to make it very easy. But the mail-in ballots, you see what happens in California. The vote still isn't counted. Can you believe it? It's like, what, 6 weeks? The vote still isn't counted. But the kid really, he was Spencer Pratt. I don't know Spencer Pratt. He came to the White House and saw me. But Spencer Pratt was an automatic lock, and he didn't make it. There was a little thing, Dina. They said, well, Spencer's falling behind a woman that nobody ever heard of. He's falling behind. No, it's very corrupt. And they were going to do that to Steve Hilton, too. And I had the U.S. attorney, did a great job. He started an investigation. They said, Steve Hilton is starting to fall badly behind. And I said, that doesn't mean falling behind. That means cheating is going on. This is 2 weeks after the election. So I got the U.S. attorney involved. And like 20 minutes after they made that statement, they said, Steve Hilton just made the runoff. These are crooked people. These are crooked people. The whole thing is terrible.
Tonight, we're taking a closer look at ballot harvesting.
They call it ballot harvesting.
Ballot harvesting. Ballot harvesting can be one of the most confusing and contentious ways to cast a ballot.
Now, what is ballot harvesting? Well, first off, it's illegal in normal states. But in California, it's perfectly legal. Ballot harvesting is when you terminate the chain of custody that is meant to ensure secure voting. And it gives non-election officials, including employees of the candidates, legal access to your ballot to do whatever they want with it.
The practice involves a third party picking up a ballot a voter has filled out and dropping it off at a drop box or an elections department. Ballot harvesting could lead to someone voting in place of someone else or allow a third party to tamper with or throw out ballots.
It used to be restricted to just immediate family members. California opened it up to anybody.
Prior to 2013, a voter had to be ill or disabled for someone else to return a ballot for them. And they had to be a family member or from the same household. After 2013, you no longer had to be sick or disabled. If you wanted a member of your household to return your ballot, they could. In 2016, the law changed again, so anyone could return your ballot, and there was no limit on how many ballots they could turn in.
So they don't want anything to get in the way of their ballot harvesting operation. This is their playbook. It's been their playbook for decades.
What's up, family? I appreciate you tuning in. Before we get into it, hit the like button, share this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your post notifications. So we're going to break this down, look at the different perspectives, and then I'll give you my thoughts. So now here's the thing. For years, people have been saying something's not right with our elections, and every time you bring it up, what do you hear? That's a conspiracy theory. There's no evidence. The elections are 100% secure. You are a threat to democracy for even asking questions. But something changed this week. Joe Rogan, not a politician, not a Republican operative, and not some random guy on the internet, sat down with Vice President JD Vance and said something that a lot of people have been thinking, but were afraid to say out loud. He said flat out, I'm not skeptical. I'm accusing them. I think they stole the election, quote unquote. Now, let that sink in for a second. You got Joe Rogan, who millions of people trust because he's independent minded, questions everything, and isn't blindly loyal to either political party, looking at what's happening and saying, yeah, this doesn't add up. At the exact same time, you got Democrats, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, coming out and demanding that cable news networks refuse to air President Trump's speech about election integrity, which takes place today, July 16th. He's going to have his speech, and they don't want you to hear what he has to say, and they don't want any transparency. So that speech will come out today as the recording this video, which I'm doing right now, and it's July 16th. So if you think about that combination, though, on one hand, they're telling us there's nothing to see here. The elections are fine. On the other hand, they're saying don't let anybody talk about it. Don't air the speech and don't investigate it. If there's nothing to see, then why are you so scared of people looking? And we're going to break all this down. A California election that even Joe Rogan called super sus. The ballot harvesting system that critics believe is designed to be exploited. The hypocrisy of calling voter identification racist when verifying somebody's identity seems like one of the most logical things in the world. And the double standard where Democrats were perfectly fine with years of Russia coalition theories, but now want to silence questions about election integrity. So let's get into it. I want to play this clip with AOC.
It doesn't get bigger because without free and fair elections, you don't have a country.
As President Trump teasing his primetime speech set for tomorrow night, two administration officials have told MS Now that the speech will focus on voting machine security and alleged foreign efforts to influence U.S. elections. The text of the speech is not final, but Trump is expected to release a declassified intelligence documents on both of those subjects. The officials tell MS Now it's not clear if Trump will present any credible new evidence, specifically regarding claims of interference during the 2020 election. We will once again note that extensive intel reviews under both the Trump and Biden administrations found no basis for claims that the 2020 election was stolen. We do know, though, that 4 years earlier, Russia certainly did meddle in the 2016 elections to Trump's benefit.
Congressman, real quick, Donald Trump is scheduled to give a big rant to spew election conspiracy theories on Thursday. Do you think that TV networks should run it? Do they have an ethical obligation?
A big ad?
Rant, like a speech. He's basically doing made-for-TV broadcasts about election fraud and conspiracy theories and all the rest on Thursday.
I don't think that we should be contributing to any platforming of lies about our election, and so I think that, many news outlets oftentimes may receive transcripts, and I think that we have an ethical obligation to not air things that undermine our election, that are not rooted in evidence and fact. And so, of course, it depends on the contents of his speech, but that's my take on it.
What do you make of JD?
So there you have it, right? So let's talk about what actually happened in California before we get to the Joe Rogan clip. And when I say this, I want you to really pay attention, because this is the kind of story that makes you question everything. You had an election in Los Angeles, and the race we're talking about included a candidate named Spencer Pratt that you've seen in the earlier clip, the first clip actually, explaining what ballot harvesting is. That was Spencer Pratt explaining that in the first clip. Now, I know some people might know him from reality television, but here's what matters. After the in-person votes were counted, Spencer Pratt was in second place, right behind the front runner Karen Bass, while a third place candidate, Nithya Raman, was way behind. That's how it stood after Election Day. Spencer Pratt was number 2 and appeared to be heading to the runoff. Then the mail-in ballots started coming in, and here's where it gets interesting. The mail-in ballots didn't just slightly favor Nithya Raman, they flipped the entire race. And she reportedly received so many mail-in votes, including ballots counted after Election Day, that she jumped from third place to second place and knocked Spencer Pratt out of the race entirely. Now, think about that. If you were watching an election and the in-person votes showed one clear ranking, wouldn't you expect the mail-in votes to be at least somewhat similar? Maybe there would be some variation here and there, but not necessarily a complete reversal where the third place candidate suddenly outperforms everybody else by that much, specifically through mail-in ballots. And here's what Joe Rogan pointed out that really got my attention. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, that it wasn't just that Spencer Pratt got overtaken by mail-in ballots. Those same mail-in ballots also helped pass a tax increase in a state that already has some of the highest taxes and living costs in the country. And people supposedly voted through mail-in ballots to pay even more taxes. Let's be real for a second. Does that sound like something a large number of everyday people would willingly do? You're living in California, dealing with high gas prices, high costs and taxes, and you're going to mail in a vote saying, you know what, we need to pay more. So to Rogan, that didn't pass the smell test. He basically said he would have to be a certain kind of Californian to wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I'm going to vote for higher taxes because I don't pay enough. And JD Vance agreed, our vice president currently, because from their perspective, it didn't make sense. Now, here's what allegations become even more serious. There has been video circulated, and I seen it, showing homeless people in Skid Row, Los Angeles, claiming that they were approached, offered cash or cigarettes, and instructed to support specific candidates with their ballots, allegedly collected by the people who approached them. Supporters of tighter election laws point to footage like this as evidence that ballot collection systems can be exploited. And California law allows voters to designate another person to return their completed ballot. And critics argue that broad third-party ballot collection creates opportunities for pressure, manipulation, or abuse. Now, pause and think about that. You designed a system where somebody may be able to go into a vulnerable community, approach people who are desperate for money at a challenging time of their life, which is evil and wicked to me. They're homeless and, they're going through something, and you're basically using them as a pawn or as leverage from their situation to capitalize off it for your own benefit. But anyway, individuals who are desperate for money or basic necessities influence their choices, collect their ballots, and submit them. Then when people suggest requiring voter identification or stronger safeguards to prevent that kind of abuse, they're accused of racism or voter suppression. I'm going to say that again. They say requiring identification to vote is racist. So let's break down that argument for a second. The implication can come across as though Black and Hispanic people are somehow incapable or dumb of obtaining IDs, as they would say. But however, they don't word it that way. I'm giving it to you the direct way up front. But they would say that it's challenging for minority groups to be able to go to the DMV and get, identification because there are so many barriers. Still falls into what I said. Black and Hispanic people are somehow incapable of obtaining IDs, as though going to the DMV or accessing government services is an impossible task minorities can't figure out. That isn't a pro-minority argument. It can sound insulting and condescending. Poland has also showed broad support for voter identification requirements across different racial and political groups, including support among many Black and Hispanic voters. And Joe Rogan brought up another point that I think a lot of people don't realize. Voter identification doesn't just address in-person voting. It can also strengthen parts of the mail-in ballot process if you have to verify your identity when register or requesting a mail-in ballot. And that identification is securely tied to your voter registration. You reduce at least some opportunities for fraud or confusion. But critics believe Democratic leaders resist those safeguards because they don't want additional scrutiny or transparency. So check out this clip.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Why is it that large population centers, like places like Los Angeles and New York, are almost always run by the Democrats?
Yeah.
Like, what is it about, first of all, what happened with the last election in Los Angeles, just the primary, I think was
crazy.
So super sus.
Yes,
and
it
here's
is.
why it's super sus. Not just super sus that Spencer Pratt, who was in second place, got overtaken by Nithya Raman in the mail-in ballots, but that the mail-in ballots also passed a tax hike. The people voted to pay more taxes.
Yep.
In a state where you have the highest
taxes. That's right.
They're like, we don't pay enough. That is insane. Then when you have direct evidence that they were recruiting homeless people.
That's right.
And they were getting homeless people and giving them cigarettes and cash. There's evidence of this. To use their address and mail-in ballots.
Yeah, I would be the Californian Joe who wakes up in the morning and says, you know what? I'm going to go and vote for higher taxes.
I don't pay enough.
I don't pay enough taxes.
I feel like we could fix this if I just pay
if I just pay
5%
more taxes. The crazy thing about it, too, is it's that, okay, so after the initial ballots all came in, it was Karen Bass was number one, Spencer Pratt was right behind her, and then number three, whatever this woman's name is. Nithya Raman. Okay, so you would expect the mail-in ballots to be more or less like the original ballots in terms of 1, 2, and 3. I'm not saying Spencer Pratt's going to win the mail-in ballots, but it just so happened that the third place person in relative terms did a lot better than the first and second place person.
Disproportionately better.
Such that the Republican was actually kicked out of the race so that there's not actually a real election in California. That, to me, was the crazy part. It's like you were designing the vote share in order to kick Pratt out and put the third person into second place. That, to me, is like very, very bizarre. Because what is the theory of the mail-in vote that is somehow like so much more pro-Nithya relative to Karen Bass?
Makes no sense.
Makes no sense.
Makes no sense. Why would it be?
Yeah.
Why would it be? I mean, Karen Bass was ahead by every metric.
Yeah. But, I mean, okay, so you asked the question, why do all these blue states, or why do all these big cities, population centers, end up becoming blue? And I think it's like a very complicated, right? So one thing, and you said this a few months ago, and like when you said it, I was like kind of annoyed by it, but then I like thought there's like an element of truth to it, which is that Republicans still fundamentally have a cool problem, right? There's something more charismatic, more cool about the Democrats as opposed to the right.
Did I say that?
So you said something about there are too many dorks or something on the right.
There's a lot of dorks.
Fair. I'd say there's a lot of dorks
There's
on the left.
a lot of dorks on the left, too.
But
It's a different kind of dork.
It's a different kind of dork. But the point is that there's something, like, okay, if you're a pop star, you're a rock star, you're an actor, you're in all these cultural centers, you're more likely to be left than right. And so I think that a lot of young people who are attracted to these population centers, they sort of move along with the prevailing culture. I think that's one thing that's going on. I think a second thing that's going on is the people who are sort of attracted to a certain kind of right of center politics. They want the suburbs, they want the single family home, they kind of want to be left alone, they don't want sort of to be able to hear what their neighbors are doing. So I think a little bit of it's just cultural self-segregation, and that's meant that a lot of these population centers have gone blue. But it's very complicated. I've thought about this a lot, and I also just, I'm not one of these people who says we should just abandon California to the Democrats, like let them deal with their own problems. I think California is like a quintessential part of the American dream. Like if you just abandon California, you've like lost something very core to American culture. And I don't want to give up on it. Like I'm not saying we're going to win California in my lifetime necessarily, but I don't like the idea of giving up on it.
Well, it's not just giving up on. Giving up on it would be terrible. It's an awesome state. The real problem is it's deeply corrupt.
Yes.
Deeply, deeply corrupt. And what they're trying to do is make it impossible for the other side to win.
Yeah.
And there should be laws against that. First of all, the idea of mail-in ballots for anybody other than people who are invalids, who can't leave their homes, or military, or people that for some reason
Absolutely.
they're serving overseas, they're doing
Yes.
something overseas, it should not be legal.
That's right.
And the fact that it became ubiquitous during COVID is a giant problem.
Yeah, so this raises one of my total segue here, side point. But so if you remember in the aftermath of the 2020 election where there was all this like debate about was the election stolen, was the election not stolen, all the litigation that moved through, there was a case in Pennsylvania that like didn't get very much attention. And I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but basically it was a guy in a rural area of Pennsylvania saying, you're undercounting my vote because we didn't have the opportunity to do the mail-in ballots like they did in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And like the argument was a kind of disparate impact, right? The cities ginned up all the mail-in balloting and the ballot harvesting. You didn't do that in the country, and that hurt sort of our representation. So they take this case to the Pennsylvania courts. And what's crazy is the Pennsylvania courts basically say, you're making kind of a good point here. Like the ballot harvesting did affect Republicans in a more negative way. It did mean that certain people in the more rural parts of the state were underrepresented. But then the court conclusion was this is not a problem a court can fix. Like that's a political problem. Change your, local elections leaders, change your laws. Like that's not a remedy that the court has to fix. And so everybody saw that case and they're like, oh, the judge rules against Donald Trump, rules against Republicans for saying that there was something illegitimate. But no, actually, the judge kind of said there is something kind of fishy here. We're just the wrong venue to fix it.
Well, it's just very disheartening that you have to consider the fact that it's really possible that the elections get stolen. And the California one was a big one for me.
And why not just have mail-in, or why not just have voter ID?
Yeah.
You actually
that's
saw
insane. Not only did they not have voter ID,
Yeah.
you can't show your ID. You're not
Correct.
allowed to show your
You
ID.
can in fact be like prosecuted if you try to force somebody to show their
Which
ID.
is, that
Yeah.
seems like you want people to cheat.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is from the same people that were saying you have to have an ID that shows you've been vaccinated just 4
So, like,
years ago to go to a
grocery
restaurant.
shopping or to go to a restaurant. Yeah, no, it's definitely, that's the part about it that I think makes most people of my political persuasion skeptical of what the Democrats are doing.
Yeah.
Like if you don't want to cheat in the election, then just make everybody actually show an ID. Another thing people don't realize is, I didn't realize this until a couple years ago, the voter ID solves a lot of the mail-in ballot problem. Because if you have to show an ID in order to get a mail-in ballot, in order to actually, confirm that there's a real identification attached to that vote, that solves a big chunk of the problem
This
too.
is just logical.
Yes.
Like I'm not
Every country does it.
I'm not skeptical. I'm accusing them. I think they stole the election.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think it's common. And this idea that elections can't be stolen. I always say to people, okay, do you think that the amount of election fraud is 0%? No one thinks that.
Yeah.
No one thinks it's zero.
Exactly.
There's always some overzealous person that works somewhere that's doing something. There's always crazy people that like blue no matter who, we got to win, or red no matter what. There's always people, right and left, that are going to try to rig the election because they think it's imperative. Look, we saw there was people like Oprah Winfrey was saying it. Like, if we don't win this election, you may never vote again. Like,
Yep.
what the fuck are you talking about? Like, why? Who's going to tolerate that?
That's
Left
right.
or right? That's crazy.
That's right.
But that attitude allows people to justify cheating.
Correct.
And I think they cheat. And I think they've been doing it forever. And I don't think there's any other reason why you would have no voter ID. And they try to say, oh, it's racist to have voter ID. Like, what are you talking about? Do you think other races are incapable of going to the DMV? That's insane.
Yeah, it's
racist.
It's actually super racist.
That's really
Right,
racist.
the implication of their argument is literally like blacks and Hispanics cannot go to the DMV to get an ID. By the way, if you look at the polling, Black Americans are as pro-voter ID. Even though most Black Americans vote Democrat, they're still pro-voter ID as much as white Americans is.
Most
White
Americans are voter.
So
They
this is a
want
crazy
voter ID,
thing.
except
Yeah.
for operatives.
So I'll offer on the Joe Rogan podcast this deal as vice president of these United States that if Democrats really don't think that there's any cheating, give us voter ID.
I just don't know
Give us
how
voter
it's
ID,
not.
and we'll stop talking so
Why
much
is that
about
not
elections.
a federal thing?
We are trying to make it a federal thing. So we are right now trying to pass the Save America Act. One of its main provisions is a requirement that you do voter ID. And we actually have, I think, a majority of the Senate that would support it. But this is just weird Senate procedural bullshit. There is a subsegment of people who want voter ID but won't blow up the filibuster in order to achieve it. And so they're so married to these old world Senate procedures that they're going to make it impossible for us to pass Save America. Now, we are, for what it's worth, trying to fix that and trying to address these like weird procedural archaic things. It's insane, though. Like, if you ever, okay, I'm sure you hear people talk about the filibuster all the time.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. Here's what the filibuster is. It is a pure Senate rule. It is a creation of the Senate procedures, which basically says that anything that has to do with the budget is a 50-vote threshold. And everything else, non-budgetary, is a 60-vote threshold. Now, as you can imagine, there's some gray area on things that maybe count as budget issues and should be 50, or are not budget issues and count at 60.
Well, I think our Vice President JD Vance is not mentioning as well, because I know he mentioned that, you have some individuals in the Senate who is just used to these old Senate rules. It also may be that these individuals know that it's the right logical thing to do, which is passing the Save America Act for voter ID to prevent fraud and elections across the board, but also at the detriment of the relationships they have that actually keeps them in power or have some type of leverage they don't want to lose. So they want to do it, but then at the cost of the relationships that they benefit from, which is stopping them from doing it, which is typical politicians or a typical politician, right? They know what's right, but sometimes they would rather just keep their connections and their relationships with their political buddies. And if that's at the cost of passing the bill that's supposed to be for prioritizing the American people and them being public servants as they're supposed to be, but it has been so cultivated to put party over people nowadays. But getting back to what I was saying in regards to transparency and all of that, AOC arguing that cable news networks, as you guys seen in the clip, should not air President Trump's speech about election integrity, describing it as platforming lies and suggesting news organizations had an ethical obligation not to broadcast claims that could undermine trust in elections. Now, here's the part that gets me. These are the same people who spent years telling us that Russia helped steal or manipulate the 2016 election for Donald Trump. If you remember that, it was the Russia thing, and there were investigations and congressional hearings and nonstop media coverage. Investigations documented Russian interference efforts but they did not establish that vote totals were directly changed. Still, those suspicions were allowed, encouraged, and treated as front page news every day. But now, when President Trump wants to discuss election integrity or make allegations concerning the 2020 election or elections in California, suddenly some people believe democracy must be protected by preventing the public from hearing them. So let me get this straight. Accusations against Trump were considered legitimate topics for years of national discussion, but accusations against Democrats involving suspicious patterns or alleged video evidence must immediately be treated as dangerous misinformation that needs to be censored. You see the double standard, right? So, digging deeper into this, something in which Joe Rogan said and JD Vance, as you see in the clip, that I think is really important is JD Vance brought up a court case from Pennsylvania following the 2020 election that he believes didn't receive enough attention. And according to the way he described the case, the man from a rural area of Pennsylvania sued, claiming that his vote was effectively diluted because urban areas such as Philadelphia and Pittsburgh had broader access to mailing voting assistance or ballot collection operations than many rural communities. So his argument was that this created um, how can I put this? A desperate impact because rural voters who tend to lean more Republican didn't have the same political infrastructure or access to ballot collection that voters in large cities had, which are mostly blue, large cities like the city of Philadelphia versus the rural area of Philadelphia don't have the same benefits in making sure their vote get casted. Is the point. So Vance's interpretation was that the court recognized there were legitimate concerns about inconsistent election practices, but they concluded that the issue needed to be addressed through legislation or election administration rather than through the particular lawsuit before the court. So he argued that many people looking at rulings like that and simply concluded the judge ruled against Trump or ruled against Republicans, when the reality was more complicated. In his telling, the court was essentially saying there may be something worth examining here, but we are not the proper channel to provide the remedy being requested or the solution. Now, here's what that looks like in real life. You're playing a game and notice the other team keeps winning in ways that don't add up. You ask to see the rule book, you ask for a referee, you ask for some basic oversight. Instead of answering your questions, they tell you stop questioning the integrity of the game. You are a threat to the game just for asking. But when you look closer, you believe the other team helped write the rules, changed some of the rules during the game, and participated in keeping score. Then, when you ask for transparency, they call you a conspiracy theorist, and that's where many Americans feel we are with election integrity in this country. And Joe Rogan says something I want to repeat because I think it gets to the heart of the issue. If you don't want to cheat in the election, then just make everybody actually show an ID. That's the whole argument right there. If you're not cheating and have nothing to hide, why fight against something as simple as verifying a voter's identity? You need identification to buy alcohol, board a plane, pick up certain prescriptions, cash a check, enter many secure buildings, but somehow require an identification to participate in an election. The process through which people choose their government is where some politicians draw the line. And to a lot of people, that doesn't add up. And let me also talk about the Save America Act for a second because JD Vance discussed it, as you heard on the podcast, as a Republican effort to require um, documentary proof of United States citizenship when registering for federal elections. And supporters described the proposal as a straightforward security measure. Prove you are a citizen and you can register to vote in federal elections. If you aren't a citizen, you can't. And opponents argue that requiring specific documents could create barriers for eligible citizens who don't readily possess a passport, birth certificate, or other accepted paperwork. And from my perspective, the basic principle isn't complicated. Only American citizens should be voting in American elections, and the government should have a clear, secure, and accessible way to verify that. And the fact that proposals like this become tied up in partisan fights, procedural rules, and accusations of voter suppression frustrates people who see proof of citizenship as a basic election safeguard. And when political leaders fight against identification requirements, voter roll maintenance, and transparency measures, critics naturally begin wondering why. And if the concern is that eligible citizens lack the required documents, then the answer should be helping those citizens obtain identification, not abandoning identity verification entirely, right? So the Bretman Center has estimated that millions of voting age American citizens may lack ready access to current documentary proof of citizenship, such as a passport or birth certificate, bearing their current legal name, but you can easily go to whatever your municipality is or the municipal area or, a vital records area and get that and basically order it online and get it mailed to you. But that is what opponents point toward when arguing that strict um, documentary requirements could disfranchise eligible voters. But ask yourself, if the government is genuinely concerned that millions of Americans lack access to proper documentation, why not focus on fixing that problem? Make identification free, create mobile identification services, which I already told you exist, and help the elderly, low income, and rural residents obtain the documents they need. I mean, I've seen a lot of DMV mobile vans and mobile trucks help young individuals in low income neighborhoods get IDs and get their license or their permits, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't have to choose between election security and voter access, is my point. A serious government should be capable of accomplishing both. It's like saying some people don't have driver's license, so let's allow everybody to drive without a license. No, you make the licensing process accessible while maintaining reasonable safety standards. So here's what I want you to take away from all this. This is bigger than one election, one candidate, or one political party. This is about whether Americans can trust that their votes are being counted accurately and whether we live in a republic where the people choose their leaders rather than a system where political organizations manipulate the rules to choose their voters. And what are we learning from all of this? First, when somebody tells you there's nothing to see, but also don't want you looking, pay attention. Because a trustworthy system should be capable of surviving scrutiny, audits, identification requirements, and transparent procedures. An election official should be able to answer reasonable questions without treating every concerned citizen like an enemy of democracy. Second, common sense still matters. You don't need a political scientist to understand why allegations of people being pressured or compensated to vote. Broad third-party ballot collection and vote totals changing significantly as different categories of ballots are counted would naturally cause questions. So if you have someone picking up votes, having ballots given to homeless people and taking all of their votes on their ballots of different names of homeless people, and one person taking all of those ballots and dropping them off, that should make you question things, right? Because who to say that person that they supposedly got the name from, that they gave money to bribe them to vote, which is their choice to vote, but you're giving an incentive based on you paying them, and that can sway um, election integrity, because now it's not really secure if you're able to pay somebody to do you a favor to stay in office. So those questions don't automatically prove that an election was stolen, but they deserve clear explanations, is my point. Transparent evidence and serious investigation rather than censorship or name calling. And third, don't allow yourself to be gaslighted. Some people are going to call anybody who questions election procedures a conspiracy theorist or a threat to democracy, but peacefully asking questions, requesting evidence, and demanding consistent rules are fundamental parts of American self-government. A democratic system that cannot tolerate scrutiny will eventually lose the public's trust. Now, I want to leave you with something from scripture because I think it fits. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1 says, "The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him." And that's what this is about at the end of the day. Honest scales, accurate weights, and fair measurements. If the system is manipulated or the scales are dishonest, then none of the other debates matter. All the arguments about policies, taxes, immigration, education, and the economy mean very little if citizens don't trust the process used or select the people making those decisions. That's why election integrity matters, not just because of one candidate or one party, but because if people can't trust the vote, they eventually stop trusting everything built on top of it. So the question I'm leaving with you is simple. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to accept the system exactly as it is? Or are you going to peacefully demand clearer rules, stronger safeguards, and greater transparency? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you believe Joe Rogan speaking out changes the national conversation? And do you think Democrats and Republicans could ever reach an agreement on voter identification that protects election security while making sure every eligible citizen can vote? Hit me with your thoughts, and as always, family, hit the like button, share this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on your post notifications, spread that peace, love, and positivity. Let the love supersede the hate, family. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.